This is the legislative advocacy training for our 2025 legislative session. Right now, as folks are entering, please remember to put yourself on mute. Video on or off is your choice, but when we get to the interactive portion, we hope that you will turn on your video and interact with your fellow alums. The presentation is going to be recorded, and that part is only going to be me for the recording. We're not going to record your conversations in the breakout rooms, only this part for folks who were not able to join us tonight. And then we've already asked for you to put your affiliation in the chat function. We're glad you're here. There'll be time to ask questions afterward. I am also here, of course, joined by my associate director, Chris Olson Phillips. Chris is well known, especially to our district dogs. Unfortunately, Chris is a bit under the weather. So, Chris, if you want to say hello, you can. I think you wanted the opportunity to say hi.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for coming. I got a pretty nasty bug this week, so Courtney has been kind enough to do my usual parts here, but we really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Chris is running tech on the back end. So thanks for Tim for rallying for that. Yes, that nasty bug, nobody should catch it. So thanks again for being here. We will launch right in. So, as I said, Courtney Acitelli, I'm the Senior Director for UW Impact. Chris Olson Phillips is the Associate Director for UW Impact. And we're also lucky to be joined today by Brooklyn Shell. Brooklyn is our intern. So we have the entire UW Impact team here. So this is tonight's advocacy training outline, and many of you who have attended these before are familiar with this. We go through the work of UW Impact. We do a brief overview of the Washington State Legislature, and we talk about Advocacy 101, what it means to advocate, what the role of an advocate is. And then we practice making the case in small groups. And then we're going to change it up a little bit this year, and we'll talk about that when we get to that portion. And then there's some time for reflections and Q&A at the end. So the end of this is actually the most important part. We hope you'll stick around for that. So first, the work of UW Impact. Here we all are in Olympia. Many of you are on this trip. Lots of fun. So we were founded in 2010. We are a comprehensive legislative advocacy and civic engagement program. So what that means is during the legislative session, we are doing legislative advocacy. We are contacting our lawmakers. We are advancing the UW's legislative agenda. We're speaking about the priorities that alumni care about. That's the legislative advocacy side. On the civic engagement side, we have a robust set of lectures, presentations, and other opportunities with partnerships with the Center for an Informed Public, with the Office of Public Lectures, focusing on democracy and engagement in the civic process. So we hope you will also join for those. We do those mostly out of session and in our other time that we're not doing our legislative advocacy. We use no public resources. We are funded by member dues. That means that we're not a program of the University of Washington. We are a program of the 501c3 University of Washington Alumni Association. So member dues. So thank you so much to those of you who are members, support our work. And we're largely state focused. So we sometimes will be asked to activate on federal issues. Every once in a while, we have a local issue. 90% of the time, even more, 95% of the time, we're state focused. We are a state university. We are a public university. That means that we get a significant portion of our funding from the state, and that's where we focus most of our energies. So we are independent from UW's government relations team. The UW, of course, has paid lobbyists. They do an incredible job. We are independent from UW government relations in that we are a grassroots organization. That's what we're doing, is organizing alums to speak on behalf of the legislative priorities. So we're a tandem program to government relations. They do the official work. We come in with the alumni voice and say, hey, we hope you'll be listening to our lobbyists. So these are the things we care about. We're informed by statewide alumni polling. This is a critical part of what we do. Every 3 years, we poll our alums and we ask them, what are the higher education issues that you care most about? We take those results, we look at the UW's legislative agenda, and we say, well, which ones of these things map up to the priorities that our alums care about. And that's how we can speak with an alumni voice that's authentic. When we're talking to lawmakers, we can say, we actually know people care about this. We've polled them. We've polled people in your district. This is what they care about. So that's an important part of what we do and how we make it authentic when we're talking to lawmakers. Um, our priorities are then developed by our legislative advocacy committee. What we do is we take that legislative agenda, we go back to our legislative advocacy committee and we say, does this look right? Do you think that these things map up to what alums care about? Do we have the right speaking points? And they help us shape that. And then we bring it onto the executive committee, and then that's how our priorities are formed. We will talk about what priorities are happening in 2025 later in this training, and then we'll send them to you afterward so that you have them in writing, and that will be kind of our guide map for the year. So since 2015, our alums have identified the following higher education priorities as most important. And we use a mnemonic device. We call it QUAD. So that's why you have the picture of the quad there. They care about quality and excellence. So by that, it means that they care that the quality of instruction remains high, that we can attract and retain world-class faculty, and that students are having an enriching experience in their classes, right? So that's the quality and excellence. Access and affordability. Our alums care deeply, that's the A, care deeply about access and affordability, that students can get into the University of Washington, get into programs they want to get into, and that those programs are affordable, right? That we're paying attention to tuition and other items that would enhance affordability for students. And then the D is demand, high demand degree programs. Our alums care very much that we are graduating students into the jobs that our economy needs, that our region needs. So those high demand degree programs are very important to our alumni. So that's the quad priorities: QU, quality and excellence; A, access and affordability; and D, high demand degree programs. Good mnemonic device for those of you who like mnemonic devices. I do. So the District Dogs program, many of you here on the call are district dogs. This is our third year. Chris Olson Phillips was actually hired to start this program, so he's just done an incredible job. We are recruiting passionate UW alumni and friends statewide to serve as district dogs. District dogs are making deeper relationships in their legislative districts with their elected officials. They're the ones that we're hoping that the elected officials might say, oh, if I have a question about the UW, this is who I can call, right? And our goal, of course, is to have district dogs in all 49 legislative districts. We're well on our way. But we do need some in some of the far-flung areas. So we always ask that you keep in mind any diehard Huskies that you might know in legislative districts that might not be represented. Think about our rural districts, some of our coastal districts, our peninsula districts and places like that. So that was the architecture. We're going to go on now to talking a bit about the Washington State Legislature, okay? So here's a bit of reflection, and we're going to pop up, I believe, a poll on the screen. Do you know your legislative district? Do you know who your legislators are and who their parties are? And do you know if they serve on a relevant committee? And this is not anything that we're not. This is anonymous. A lot of folks don't know the answers to these questions, and that's okay. This kind of gives us a good idea of who's on the call, who might know, who might not know. So take a bit of time and answer that if you can. We've got some folks participating. Thank you. Not quite half of you yet. There we go. Over half now. This is great. And again, there's no shame in not knowing. A lot of folks don't know, right? And that's why we do these things. We do these trainings specifically for folks who haven't yet had the opportunity to become acquainted. Okay, it looks like we have just about critical mass here. And then there's the results. So most folks know their legislative district, a couple don't, and the parties of their lawmakers, right? So that gives you a good idea of who's familiar. And if your lawmakers serve on any relevant committees, that's a tough one. And we don't know yet. We know maybe who has served. Those committees are actually being selected this week. All right. So now we will go on. So here's some answers to our questions. We have three lawmakers who represent districts in the state, right? The state legislature. So each of us has one senator and two representatives. There are 147 legislators in 49 legislative districts. So this is the makeup here. We have our House members, 98 of them, and our Senate members, 49 of them. We have a 2-year state budget that's developed in odd numbered years. That means that 2025 is a budget session. That means that our asks are big. We have a biennial budget. So what that means is it's developed every 2 years. Those odd years are when we ask for the moon. And then in the supplemental budget years, which are the even years, is when we say, oh, maybe we didn't get this in the major session. Maybe we need a little additional money for that. So it's kind of almost a cleanup year after the budget year. We're in a budget year now. So this is a critical year. There's an operational budget and a capital budget. Operations are the day-to-day, keeping the lights on, the teaching and the teaching mission of the university, all of those day-to-day items that the operations of the university. The capital budget is the big ticket items, the buildings and the infrastructure and the long-term expenditures. So that's the difference between those two budgets. They work on both of those on the biennial. And then this is a 105-day legislative session that begins January 13th. So here are our relevant committees. In the House, we have the College and Workforce Development Committee and Appropriations. That's our budget writers, and a Capital Budget Committee. So when we're thinking about our lawmakers and we want to know which committees they're on, these committees, Senate committees, Higher Education, Workforce Development, Ways and Means, are the budget writers, then they have a capital budget subcommittee. Those budgets are meaningful because that's where some of the biggest decisions are made. If you don't know if your lawmakers on any of these, which the majority do not, that's our job at UW Impact. So we will tell you once folks are sorted into their committees, whether or not your lawmaker is in those committees. You will be receiving from us shortly district fact sheets. Each one of you will receive an updated district fact sheet that will tell you who your lawmaker is, which party, when they were elected, any relevant facts, and which committees they're on. So you'll be getting those within the next 2 weeks. Once we know who's on the committees, we'll send those out in advance of the legislative session. So now we know the state legislature. We know we're getting our fact sheets. What do we do with them once we get them? Advocacy 101. We'll launch into what that looks like. What does it mean? If you are a new board member, advocacy is part of your board duties. It's written into the board expectations. So for many of you, this may be brand new. You haven't been an advocate before. You don't exactly know what to expect. This is your portion. So what UW Impact does, most of the time, we are preparing you for in-person or virtual meetings. So you will maybe come to Olympia with us this year. I believe it's February 6th. And you may decide you want to meet with your lawmaker in your home district when they're home, or you might want to set up a Zoom meeting with your lawmaker. That's our job, to help you connect. So that's the bulk of what we do. We also send out action alerts via email at key times in the legislative session. We'll send you one and ask you to welcome your lawmakers into session and to keep UW in mind as they're writing their budgets. We'll then keep track of all of the UW budgetary requests and write to you at specific times saying, hey, now's a great time to remind your lawmakers that we would like more funding for compensation, right? So that's something that we're doing here that we will ask you to be doing. And then in special circumstances, we might have some phone calls, personal letters or postcards. That's something that we haven't done for years, but we do in certain special circumstances. And then on social media, sometimes people like to, I don't even know what you call it now, tweet at, X at. some of their lawmakers who might be active on social media. Some are and some are not. So mostly what we'll be doing are in-person or virtual meetings and responding to our calls, UW Impact's calls for your mass emails to go to your lawmakers. We have a way to personalize them and to make them look like they're not bulk emails, right? So meetings with legislators, for those of you who have not maybe had the opportunity to meet with your lawmaker, legislator meetings are usually 15 minutes long. There's not a ton of time to convey your key points. So what we ask folks to do is to do their research prior, know any specific bills or budget proposals, know what issues the lawmakers ran on or supported during their campaign. We don't expect you to do all of your own research. This is what we do for you, right? But these are the things that we like to have people prepared with. And in many cases, you already know. And in some cases, it's unfamiliar, and that's okay. We're here to help you prepare. So during our 15-minute legislator meetings, this is important. You might meet with a legislative assistant or staff. We treat legislative assistants and staff the same way we would treat the lawmaker. These folks have access to the lawmakers, they have great information, and they are gatekeepers. So if we are given a legislative assistant or a staff member, we show that staff member respect. We show up, we give the same speech, and we trust that they're getting that information to their lawmaker. We cite a top priority or priorities. If we're asking for 7 or 8 things, we're not going to say all 7 or 8 things in the meeting. We'll pick 1 or 2 or 3, maybe the ones that we have a personal connection to, and then, or something that we have data on that's easy to convey, and we decide to go with those messages. We also don't want this to be just a let us have you drink from the fire hose. We want to ask lawmakers what their top priorities are. What assistance can we provide to you? What do you want to accomplish this session that we can help with? If you're going to help us with more funding for the university, maybe there's something that we can be doing to help you back in our neighborhood that you would like us to convey. So it's important that the lawmaker also feels like this isn't just us coming in to ask, but also that we're on their team. So after we meet with legislators, we say you should leave or email a personal message, whatever else you want to expand on, and gratitude. One thing that's changed for those of you who've been advocating for a long time, or maybe you remember going down to Olympia with the PTA or another organization, lawmakers no longer like to receive things in paper. That is because we have a very cumbersome law now in the state of Washington that anything that is given to them in paper has to be registered and filed. It creates a lot of paperwork. And it's challenging to get folks to take what you're giving them now. It used to be you always leave a leave behind sheet. Leave behind sheets, we can still leave them. They prefer you to email them or for them to take notes or a staff member to take notes. So that's usually what we do nowadays. And that gratitude piece at the end is critical. We want to thank our lawmakers for their time and have them remember us favorably. So some additional tips. Lay the groundwork early. And by this, we mean, sometimes it takes multiple sessions to get funding for an item or to receive a favorable result on a bill that we're asking for. We want to do the work not when it's critical, but when it's being built, right? So sometimes we have the opportunity to start talking about an issue 3, 4, 5 years in advance. We let you know when that's happening. And just remember, advocacy now can pay off later. We don't always get it in the session, but we've educated. If nothing else, we've educated our lawmakers on the topic, and we can feel confident that it won't be the first time they're hearing about it when it comes up again. I also note here, check out your legislator's campaign site or social media. You can often tell what's important to them by looking. And if they're already committed, just think rather than ask. A lot of times, especially for those of us who live in the Seattle area, a lot of our lawmakers have a UW campus in their district, Bothell or UW Seattle, and hey, you know what? I already support the UW, whatever you want, we're going to try to get. If they're already committed, we don't have to spend time convincing them, but rather we say thanks. And maybe, is there anything we can do to help you bring your colleagues along that might not be there yet? So this is where we launch into making the case. And this is where we've made a change to this training that we haven't done before. We usually break up into groups and talk about these and have people make the case to each other. We're going to do it a little differently this year after we go through what the priorities for the session are. So if you take nothing else from this legislative session, from this training, here are the primary messages we want you to know that's happening this year. You don't have to memorize these now. We will give you a sheet that has all of this following the training, but this is what we hope you'll take with you tonight. So during a budget session, there are key priorities to emphasize, right? We have multiple requests this year. We have them listed here in the order in which we think that they are needing support, but not necessarily in the order in which our alums care about them, if that makes sense. So we know our alums care about all of this stuff, but we have them in the order that we think they'll be some of the toughest asks. So you can find all of this when we send out our speaking points document shortly. So one of the biggest requests, and this is a request that is shared by the other 5 public universities, is for compensation. Now, the compensation request is not give us a ton more money. We all need to be, making just, tons and tons of money. That's not the request. The request is that the state covers compensation again. So that means compensation for faculty and staff, collective bargaining agreements. Before the Great Recession, the state covered compensation. You remember years and years and years of having affordable tuition and things like this. The state covered the compensation back then. Since the Great Recession, when the state rolled back its funding for all public universities and for the technical and community colleges, University of Washington has been using tuition dollars for compensation increases. Okay, that's where the source of revenue we have is tuition. We've been having to use tuition dollars to cover revenue increases and collective bargaining agreements. 2 years ago, in the last budget session, the state agreed to grant the technical and community colleges their compensation budget again. Now the public universities want the same thing. Please go back to the former model and let us have tuition dollars to spend on other things. Tuition caps and rising costs make the tuition model unsustainable. We can't keep using tuition revenue for compensation in perpetuity. Tuition is capped. The legislature capped it. We can't keep raising it to raise compensation costs. We're growing. We need something different to happen there. So the state funding for compensation, here's what's interesting. We're saying, the university is saying, will free up resources for the UW to admit more in-state students to the Seattle campus. This is something that we know alumni want. We know parents want it. We know that donors want it. And most importantly, we know that lawmakers have wanted it. So this is a big deal. Each of the public universities is coming up with something it will do with the dollars it's currently using for compensation that will satisfy the legislature. Our gesture is we will expand the slots we have for in-state students. So very interesting message there. And it's nuanced. It has a few things in there, right? We want to shift the cost back to the state. And in exchange, we will take the money we were using on compensation and expand our slots for in-state students. Very interesting message. We can talk more about it, but that is one of the most important requests that we have this year and something that each of the 6 public universities hopes to bring home from the legislature this year. The second big request, this is giant, 292 million, okay, is for we have 10 essential projects in our clean energy, clean energy policy that we adopted that the state helped us write that we need to have funded. We have the Climate Commitment Act. We have revenue from that. It's not coming from the general fund that we're hoping to tap to begin to address our infrastructure problems. 93% of campus emissions stem from a 100-year-old power plant. If you're on the Burke Gilman, you see the power plant with the water coming down. That's the old power plant. We desperately need to replace it. So we know that, we have these $9 million of fossil fuels that we're using. We need modernization, and this is kind of desperate. So we're in a situation where we want to start this infrastructure projects. It aligns with the recent voter support for the Climate Commitment Act. You might remember on your ballot, there was a move to repeal it. Voters did not want to repeal it. We have a lot of revenue in there. We're asking to tap that revenue to update our outdated energy systems. Couple more points there. Our medical centers lost power during the heat wave last summer because of this aging infrastructure. UW Tacoma had a bad car accident. You might have remembered this near campus that resulted in a 10-day power outage. All of these things could have been mitigated if we had more modern power infrastructure. So that's what we're trying to do. So that's another giant ask. And then when we go back into the other key requests, these are very well related to the things that our alums care about: student support services, mental health, academic counseling, disability accessibility support on all three campuses. When I see anything that's for all three campuses, it excites me immensely. We have advocates from all three campuses. It's going to be a meaningful session to go down and ask for something that covers all three campuses. So student support services on all three campuses. Another item on all three campuses is expanding high demand degree programs, AI, computer science, data science, nursing, compute, all of those things on all three campuses. We're asking for those high demand degree programs to be expanded. So something our alums care about, something we know the legislature wants. And then there's one big capital request, and it's to modernize the chemical sciences facilities. That's Bagley Hall. Last year, your advocates, any of you on the call will recall that we received the design money for this. Now we're asking for the construction money. Legislature likes to close the loop on things that it's already funded, but it's a big ask. It's 125 million we're asking from the state, but the UW is going to support that with 175 million between philanthropy and institutional debt. And those capital requests match up to quality and excellence and high demand degrees, of course. Well, if you've been in that facility, I know some of you have, it is old. Part of our facilities date from the 1930s, part from the 1950s. So modernization is definitely a quality and excellence issue. So those are the key requests.